Hello and welcome. This is Alchemistexe, and this episode of New Player Questions is going to be all about CT, which is the mechanic by which turns are taken. Now, Alchemist Code uses what is commonly called a charge turn system. That means that unlike something like, say, Pokemon or like the early Dragon Quest games or early Final Fantasy, where you just have a round and then whoever has the highest speed goes first, and then all speed determines is how quickly you get to take your turn. Now, in a charge term system, that's also true of speed, but you also get to take more turns because a round isn't just a single isolated instance of everyone involved in the battle taking one turn. So, speed is a much more valuable stat, as you may have noticed just playing the game. And so, it's important to know how that factors into CT and then how you can play around with that to your advantage. So, the most, rudimentary version of that is just the chronomancer skill set of quicken to make everything go by faster, overclock to just immediately add 100 CT. Some of the job plus chronomancers like Rahu also have just like a flat AoE CT booster, and then certain characters like Sol or Wilhelm can also do a CT boost, as well as any merchant with jewel investment. Now, none of those are as potent as the overclock, but a lot of those can also be done without cast times. And so sometimes just giving someone that bump they need to get up to 100 can be more valuable than waiting through enemy turns to get to an instant turn. Now, the way that the system works is that CT gain is a function of agility. I believe it's 1/10 of your agility stat. Your CT increases by that amount every time the clock ticks. And we don't necessarily see every tick of the clock because it's only going to stop when someone's at 100 CT, so several steps would have to be skipped. But you can get an idea of character CT gain by just looking at their CT on the map in between different character turns. And it becomes really noticeable the faster characters get, which, it's one of the reasons that Noin is such a beast, is because his agility is through the roof and he's really strong. And if you've been using really fast characters and or just fighting really slow enemies, you may have noticed that a character can take two turns in a row without even being assisted by something like an overclock. And the reason for that is that you can have a surplus of CT. Like once you get 100, you get a turn, but you are not losing any CT gained if once you reach that 100, which is why the merchant skill can be handy, even if it's only tipping you, say, from 90, that you're not losing that extra 40 CT. And that can be really handy because you can really snowball a character's speed, especially if they are already very quick, and then say you quicken them. So the value of these ways of manipulating CT is largely, dependent on context. Slower characters are going to appreciate overclocking more, whereas quickened characters like that it helps faster. It helps everybody, but it helps faster characters more. I mean, ideally, in a perfect scenario, you would have like all your units quickened and the enemy delayed, which is what's happened here in this battle that I'm showcasing from the raid. But you can't always do that. Sometimes it's if you have to get stuff done by certain turns, etc. Then it might be better to just delay an enemy rather than quicken everyone else, if you can't do both. And then another important thing about CT is that much like HP and jewels, it can be damaged, in addition to being, quote, healed. And that's another reason Noin is really good. He's also got the CT damage. And then in a few instances, it can actually be used as a scaling stat too. If you've ever used Nyx or Mira, and there might be other characters too, but those were the two that came to mind immediately. But yeah, so that's just the rundown of how CT works and kind of my advice for how best to use it. I always recommend experimenting. That enlightenment material level is good for that. But next, I'm going to showcase a little trick. Okay, so the thing that I'm going to showcase is a way that you can utilize overclocking and how it interacts with charge times. Because when you are charging a spell, it waits to go off and then it has its own place in like the CT wheel. And overclocking can mess with that, for better and for worse. If somebody uses a single turn charge up, never overclock them because you might ruin the charge up if the turn comes around before. Sometimes a character's like turn will naturally wrap around. It happens with Chihaya a lot, but this one I actually tested and planned it out. So the goal is we want to hit Wagina with a spell, but he wasn't in range. So Lofia is overclocking Nina right before her spell would have gone off, but now she's got a turn, and you can see that it's before her turn will work. So you have to pick the exact same spell, which in this case is Call of the Crusade. But if you pick the same spell, you get to instant cast it. So it allows you to retarget a spell. And thus, bop, and that is just one handy little way that you can interact with CT that I think is pretty fun. But remember that it does count as an extra turn, so think about that when considering buffs. But yeah, that is it for this one. It's just about CT, and I will see you guys next time.